Alright, YouTube, it's time for the Occult, video 118, Eternal Struggle, the Illusion of Utopia. On this channel, I talk about politics and society frequently. I suggest what I think is the right solution for various problems. We have problems, for instance, with a corporate legacy media. We simply supplant that with a more decentralized media and vigorously defend it. We have problems with our political structure being controlled by corporations and banks. Well, over time, eventually, a constitutional amendment will be necessary. I support a constitutionalist system, one in which government and corporate power are both far more constrained than the Constitution we use now. I believe in a free market. I believe in libertarianism, not anarchism. There does have to be rule of law. It's just you have to apply that intelligently to a limited number of things. Otherwise, government gets big, and when it gets big, it tends to get stupid. But one thing I fully admit is that this is also a utopian style of thinking. That is, over the long span of time, you can stave it off for a very long time. The more proper a system is implemented, the longer it lasts in its more pure form, the more slowly it degrades. It's like evolution. A life form which is more fit within a given environment will tend to last longer. It will reproduce more successfully. However, things change over time. Technology changes. Mankind's opinion on things change. It doesn't ultimately, long term, we're talking the span of thousands or tens of thousands of years, it doesn't even really matter what system you implement. It will degrade over time. Even the most seemingly perfect paradise-style system, you'd think of any randomly selected individual pushing whatever ideology they happen to support. Let us suppose that they manage to implement it in a vacuum, that there's no outside influence on that system. Even from within, over time it will begin to rot from the inside out. It will collapse or undergo some sort of revolution or reformation. It will change forms in accordance with the will of the people, the will of a military, the will of a reigning government, the will of nature, whatever it happens to be, and it will crumble to the ground. Its old form is forsaken. In the United States, for example, we operated under, very much so, real capitalism for the first roughly century of our inception. It did exist. Sometimes people have claimed that I've made the claim, oh, real capitalism hasn't existed. I don't make that claim. It has. It existed in this country from its founding up through just after the Civil War. When the Gilded Age took hold, it began to degrade. Corporations, corporate entities, business entities realized that they could monopolize. And they could then use price fixing and trusts and so forth, non-competitive trusts. It strangulated things. Now, if we had returned at that point to an actual free market, if we had gone back, simply squished out the trusts and monopolies through a constitutional amendment of some sort, we could have avoided the problems that attenuated the progressive era. People clamored, though, for breadcrumbs from the rich man's table. The progressive era took hold, and the rest is history. It's gotten steadily worse since the military-industrial complex was born under FDR. It's gotten even worse since the Patriot Act sort of mass surveillance, big government, big brother era. It's getting worse over time. It is degrading. Now, does this mean that it suffers an inevitable collapse? No. We've seen situations before in human history where things are going wrong, or they're perceived as going wrong. It happens in religious context, too. It happened multiple times in ancient Egypt, for example. Various cults or pharaohic lineages were overthrown in favor of those that people liked more. It happened all the time, especially in the ancient world. Reform is possible. That is from within. If those powers that be are wise, if they're, more committed to doing the right thing, perhaps. If not, a revolution can take hold. It can be successful. It can even be bloodless. Or it results in slow degradation and or outside interference, warfare, sabotage, and so forth, and it collapses. All systems eventually do this. There will never be a long-term, a stable system of government. Government is like biology. That's why I support free market capitalism. I see it as the adaptation of evolutionary principles to an economy and to a nation's rule of law. I believe that it must be limited in the same sense that if a particular organ gets fucked up and starts multiplying out of control, what do we call it? We call those cell lines cancer, and it slowly degrades and destroys the being. Just because the brain is rapidly producing new cells doesn't mean that those cells are healthy. It has its proper location. It has its proper things to do, its proper purpose. It absorbs a proper amount of nutrition from the body and runs things. The brain is like a government. Big government is like a brain tumor, in my opinion. Humans operate on biological principles. We're slaves to biology. Therefore, a system which is based, at least loosely, on the concept of biology, on evolution especially, to me seems most appropriate. But then again, it's not an objective opinion. It's my opinion based on my understanding of how governments and states work. Other people have other opinions. Some people say, well, we should just have no governments at all. It should be anarchy. Control shouldn't come from a state. It should come from... I don't even quite understand. They bicker all day over where the source of control comes from. Communists would say we've eliminated the state and now we just have people magically sharing amongst themselves. The neoconservatives or neoliberals or whatever, they look at things and they say, well, we need a strong government corporate structure to maximize efficiency. I say, of course, that generally speaking, most of that productivity that has advanced gets frittered away by bureaus or kickbacks. So there's no single... The paradox is this. Because things are ever changing, climates change, resources change, the weather changes, everything changes. Human beings have changed over time too. Man is, a good half-foot taller in many parts of the world than he was 100 years ago. Because of this, there is no single system of government, no single social or moral system, no single religion that can ever permanently gain dominance. There is always change. Now, is this bad? No, it's not. There will be always times of upheaval. There will be evil leaders, there'll be tyrants, and there'll be oligarchs, and there'll be good leaders, there'll be bad leaders. There will be states that are oppressive, there will be states that are free. It's happened throughout all of human history and will continue to. The one group that sets itself aside are people like transhumanists who think we need to fundamentally transform the human element, perhaps because they understand the biological concept, so they seek to transcend that biology, to change it fundamentally. I would say, yeah, but you're still going to be subject to those biological systems, to evolution and so forth. You're not going to permanently fix it. Nothing is permanent. You can stretch it out, just like a more stable system tends to last longer than a more unstable system. But that doesn't mean it's permanent. It doesn't mean that it lasts forever. Indeed, the universe probably won't last forever. Science, of course, considers it extremely likely that at some point it will undergo heat death. Will this happen? Will it not happen? I don't know, honestly. I'm not a physicist. Regardless, though, its ability to sustain life, especially when you're not even an interstellar, let alone intergalactic species, would be, over time, it's certainly malleable. There are probably many planets out there that once had life that don't now. Earth could become one of these planets, a million years from now, a billion years from now, we're not sure. So people have to avoid utopian thinking. You can't think in objective ways, you have to think with pragmatism. My concept is that a free market capitalistic system is the most pragmatic. It works the best, it's the most efficient if it's properly regulated. And by regulated, I don't mean by a government, I mean by a constitution. If it's formed properly, if it's defended properly as well, that makes a difference. The population must be well armed. The population must be educated in civics. They must understand their rights and defend those rights, preferably with the backing of a patriotic military that will as well defend them from tyrants in or outside of that country. But that's just my opinion. That's based on my understanding of biology, and it's based on my understanding of man's history. There are other opinions out there that differ from that one. And then there are people, there's a big difference between those who admit the subjectivity of their beliefs within government or whatever, as I do, and those that claim it to be objective. There are plenty of people who support free market capitalism who will state with a straight face that their system is objective, eternal, undying, always works, inevitably, that, any capitalistic system that's become degraded was never capitalism to begin with. I hear this all the time from communists. They're probably the biggest users of that illogical discourse there. But capitalists do it too. People who are nationalistic do so. I've spoken to primitivists of various colors. Left primitivism, anarcho-primitivism of sorts, and then tribalism, sort of the National Socialism, primitive side light, pagan elements or whatever. Everyone has a tendency to do this. In our public discourse, most people take up an absolutist line. The problem is, especially for somebody they support a free market, they support a constitutional system, they support limited government, how can you be at the same time some sort of moral absolutist and claim, well, our system is just the best, we're going to force that on people as well, even on parties that are comfortable with some other system? That becomes a paradox unto itself. Which is more penultimate? Or which one should be more hegemonic, I should say? Which one is more important, to spread that libertarian system around, number one, or to respect that some people may have exempted themselves from the same? What about if you end up hostile to one of these groups? There's a little bit of a paradox there that people can disagree on. It's just like the border situation. I disagree with many libertarians. I do not believe in an open borders world. I believe that nationalism is closer to libertarianism than globalism is, because I see globalism as just nationalism on steroids, with the most tyrannical elements retained and all of the redeeming facets cast aside. Again, my opinion, totally subjective, could be debated for forever, essentially, but that's what I feel. In terms of the occult, occultism has changed over time. Spirituality, religions, whether mainstream or small and more cultic, magic in a general sense, it changes wildly over time. The forms of magic people tend to use today are nothing like they were 100 years ago. Back in the Victorian era, you have the elaborate ritualism and the seances and the pentagrams drawn on the floor and stuff. Now people are, using evocation. They're using a little piece of paper and with a magic marker, they draw some symbol on it and start meditating or something like that. Or they just take a dose of acid and then go commune with the demons or something along those lines. Magic fits the form of whatever mankind happens to want at the time as well. Especially fraudulent magic, because of course that's being marketed. So if I tell people, I just created a new system of magic, it requires 10 years of nonstop ritual work, is that really going to be of interest to most people? No. People might collect the book in a leather-bound edition and sell it for $1,000 on eBay, but they're probably not practicing from it. And if they say they are, chances are they're not telling the truth. They're just saying that they did, while actually putting it on their shelf to gather dust, so to speak. Most people, their attention span's gone down over time, so you get more simplistic magic. In some renaissance of traditional occultism, you might begin to see more elaborate ritualism, more elaborate, especially use of herbs and so forth, or something like that. Here's how to make your candles. You're going to need to, because you're going to need them for this altar. You must carve it yourself on top of a mountain under a full moon, something like that. So things change over time. The illusion of utopia is that there will never be one, because it can never last forever. And this is both good and bad. It's kind of like the bittersweet idea of building a sandcastle. Oh, the sandcastle's so cool, but it's going to be destroyed. It's just an opportunity to build a different sandcastle when the tide goes back out, I suppose. So you can look at it as a positive or negative thing, or you can look at it as just the state of life as it is. But that governs everything. The same part of me that notices biology, notices evolution, says, well, free market capitalism essentially overlaps in the best of ways with it, along with limited libertarian-style government, also notices that through that same evolutionary process, survival of the fittest and so forth, with all of its various mathematical effects upon gene pools, that change is inevitable, that it can be painful, it can be traumatic, it can lead to extinction in some cases, but ultimately it is necessary, and therefore, I suppose you could say good, after a manner. It's moral, if you believe in that at all. That's about all. Peace out.